Hi, thanks for stopping by. Today, I want to talk about inflation, price inflation, how prices are climbing more quickly, frankly, than even wages are. But I don't want to just talk about inflation. I want to talk about a specific story regarding energy, oil and gas in particular, that lives underneath the inflation story that makes things pretty interesting for us at the moment. There are a couple of facts about inflation that I want to highlight. First, it's very high. The most recent report that we have from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics says that inflation is about 8.6% year over year. That means on average, the price of an average good or service that you would buy is very nearly 10% higher this year than it was last year. And we know that number's high. The US Federal Reserve tries as hard as it can to keep price increases at about 2% year over year. So we're looking at price inflation that's nominally 4 times faster than the Federal Reserve would prefer to see in an ideal economic environment. Inflation is also widespread. It's hitting food, it's hitting energy, it's hitting cars, new cars, used cars, it's hitting apparel. Basically anything that consumers are spending their money on is going up in price. Some sets of goods and services are rising more quickly in price than others, but all of them are moving up, and they're moving up very rapidly relative to what they've done in recent history. And like I said, here I want to concentrate on energy. We know that gasoline prices in particular are receiving a lot of attention. US average prices for a gallon of gasoline have been at or near $5 recently. And again, that's much higher than what we've seen in recent history. And that kind of sticker shock matters. It makes people want to drive their cars less. It makes less funds available for buying staples, food, for paying rent, for getting new clothes, for paying for college. All the other things that we need to do, or in some cases would like to do, get a lot harder when energy costs go up so high. And it's not just that the energy costs themselves are so high, they're coming off a very low base. You know, we've seen gasoline prices climb 50% or more within the past 12 months. And that kind of rapid increase in price really hurts, and consumers really notice, and it's an important part of the inflation story. There's a little more going on to this energy picture, though, that I want to make sure that we pay attention to. And we can see some important details in this chart right here. What we're looking at is the US Consumer Price Index, which is a measure of the movement of prices from January 2012 all the way through May 2022. And this data comes from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what we're doing is setting the January 2012 levels at 0%. So we're looking at how prices have climbed relative to those levels at the beginning of 2012. This chart shows us a few different lines. The black line is for all items, and we see again a slow and steady decline increase that gets us all the way up to about 30% in the early part here of 2022. That means that prices in May of 2022 averaged across all items that are tracked in the Consumer Price Index, or about 30% higher than they were in the beginning of 2012. The orange line is just showing us food. And we see food pretty much tracks all items. There's not that of an interesting divergence there. The gray line is all items excluding food and energy. Same thing, it races a little bit ahead of the black line, but once you get to May 2022, they're all more or less at the same level. What gets really interesting is the blue line, and that's showing the prices of energy as tracked by the Consumer Price Index from the beginning of 2012 all the way through 2022. What gets interesting is this collapse that we see toward the back half of 2014. And that's when oil prices dropped dramatically. They were at $100 a barrel in the summer of 2014 and started dropping very quickly. They stayed low through all of 2015 and into the first part of 2016. And oil prices actually hit their low in February of 2016, something like $26 a barrel. And then we start to see a climb in oil prices from February of 2016 into the rest of the time window that we're capturing. So we see this blue line start to climb up a bit. We see the expected dip around the onset of the pandemic, and then this very aggressive climb coming out of the pandemic. So when we're looking at the aggregate numbers for all these subsets of data, how have prices moved on the whole across these categories? We see that prices for all items have risen 27% in aggregate from 2012 levels. Food and energy are up the most, and they're each up 29%. And all other items, excluding food and energy, are up 27%. What does this mean? This means that since the beginning of 2012, basically all prices have moved up more or less the same degree. Energy feels so different because the path to get here has been so different for energy than it was for food or all the other items outside of food or energy. When we had this prolonged dip in energy prices that lasted the better part of a decade, when we get a re-acceleration of energy prices to get back to the levels that all other items have climbed over that period of time, it feels like a much more substantial move, because it is a more substantial move. We're spending much more on energy today than we were a year ago. But if we rewind this clock 10 years, we're paying about the same as what we would have expected if we were just paying attention to how much more food costs, or clothing, or cars, or anything else that we're tracking. So energy feels different because it is different. At the same time, it's not that those prices have climbed any more over the past decade than anything else have. In fact, it's a pretty close march across all of these goods and services buckets. Now we've seen the really interesting context behind the recent moves in energy prices. Energy prices have climbed much more within the past year than basically any other good or service item has. And that's for real, the data bears that out. What's pretty interesting is if we rewind the clock a decade, energy prices today are where we would expect they would be given how everything else has moved. The reason it feels so painful today is we had such a long period of low energy prices that were effectively subsidized by losses across the oil and gas industry. And so those losses made us feel an artificially low level of energy price for most of the past decade. And now energy prices are coming back to frankly where they should have been based on where we saw them a decade and more than that ago. It was just this recent history of abnormally low energy prices that makes today's energy feel so much more expensive, and it contributes to the pretty high inflation level that we see today. We would still see a high inflation level today, even if energy had climbed at the same rate that it had been, that all the other items had been over time. So it's not like the inflation readings today are somehow an anomaly or fictitious. These are real inflation readings, and we need to make sure that we understand them and that our economic authorities understand how we go about combating these inflations. At the same time, there is an emotional element here because we've ridden this energy roller coaster in a way that we've not ridden for other items. Thanks a bunch for stopping by. I hope you learned something interesting about inflation as a result of this video. If you have any other ideas about what you'd like to hear more about from the economy, markets, businesses, any data-driven topic in these domains, definitely let me know. I'm looking for new ideas for new videos, so leave a comment and I'll get right back to you. Thanks again. Bye-bye.